how then do we go about building global solidarity? And again, I wanted to go back in order to go forwards because I'm a child of the 1970s. Remember the anti-apartheid movement being one of the few movements that linked global South politics to the North, not only in terms of theory, but in terms of practice, in terms of organizing, in terms of thinking about racialized oppression. And there was that great moment in the early 90s when Nelson Mandela came to Britain as a consequence of this global struggle, this global solidarity, to then support anti-racism in Britain. And it's one of the few moments where this connection has been made by people in the global South. Often folk come, including the folk doing reparations, we've spoken to them about this, and just have one issue in mind, but don't necessarily join up the dots. So they understand that you can't talk about decolonization without dealing with issues around racialized oppression within the domestic context in Britain. So global solidarity matters, but we need to join up the dots more effectively for this to happen. You can't talk about discrimination in the South and not deal with discrimination at home in our workplaces.
Radio silence in Sudan and the DRC, I think, and you already talked about it, can be seen through kind of the lens of necropolitics. Racialization puts black people at the bottom of a hierarchy of whose lives has value. So that's what racialization does. Necropolitics then means that state-sanctioned violence, either through direct action, so state-sanctioned explorations and exploitations of resources, or neglect, or inaction. So, Dr. Begum already talked about the aid cuts. It's like whose life is seen to matter and whose life is prioritized as needing, not saving in terms of white saviorism, but in terms of whose life matters and where should the money be.
So as much as we talk about global solidarity, there is also a history of national solidarity, uniting people around shared material concerns. Because at the end of the day, we all want a roof over our heads, we all want food on the table, we all want money in our pockets, we all want safer streets. And when I think about some of those areas that saw riots last year, Hartlepool, Hull, Sunderland, Great Yarmouth, Clacton, they have high levels of poverty. And the argument I've always made is, well, they're not that different to places like Luton, like Bradford, like Brixton, like Birmingham. They actually have the same material concerns. And so the task ahead is to actually try and unite communities on that shared vision of improving our lives without shying away from calling out racism, without shying away from addressing the narratives that are coming from the top.
That was a really, really powerful account of the history of race, poverty, and class, the somewhat lack of safety in institutions of power, and also, of course, the importance of what it means to be organised within our own communities.
I want to say that when I introduce the work that I do, I say I work on green and fair economies, and people are always like, well, what do you mean by fair? And I mean, what I mean is equity, but we can't use that word equity because it, like inequality and the discussions around that scare off funders and also lead to debates about like what is credible and what is possible. So I take the option of avoiding that and talking about fairness, which is something that we can all get behind. And while I do that because I think it's really important to have a broad church, to be inclusive, and because of something that Taj talked about, which is the fundamentals of power. If we're going to generate change, we need to be really clear about where our power is coming from. And I guess what I and what the speakers here have spoken about today is about solidarity, it is about people power, and it's about unity and what brings us together as opposed to what divides us. But recognizing there is a diversity experience and we have to be careful about how we hold that diversity.